All right, it seems like everybody's trickled in a little bit. We'll probably catch a few stragglers as we go. So welcome everyone to Gray Associates Demand Trend for Higher Education Programs Community College Focused Webinar. This is our first, which will become a new series in monthly webinars focused exclusively on programs offered by community colleges. After attending the AACC, the Community College Conference earlier this year, we realized what we were doing in our monthly webinars, which we happen to have been doing for over 6 years, we could really also break down into really looking at community colleges. So what you'll see in here is mostly programs focused on the associate level or lower moving forward. We'll look at trends for these programs and for community colleges every month. And basically you can stop by here every month and we will give you an updated data from stats from Google, as well as looking at employment data, as well as competition on a national level. At the end of these webinars, just so everybody knows, if you want, we do have our head of customer success, Linnell, on here, and he'll open up our software to actually look at a program in a geographic region if we can, if you have any other programs you would like to see. A few housekeeping items to start with. At the very bottom, there's a Q&A section and a raise hand section. If you'd like to raise your hand, I will make sure we get your question answered. If you want to put a question in the Q&A section, please feel free. If you have a comment, please feel chat. We always love the interaction. The last thing I'd like to say about this is we are always looking to make these webinars more valuable to you. Given it's the first one we've done, please provide any feedback. What would you like to see? What would you like to see differently? Is there a data point we didn't hit? We'd be more than happy to kind of address that. And we want to add to this webinar as we build it going forward. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to our CEO, Robert Atkins.
Thanks very much, Ned. This is Bob Atkins. I'm the CEO and founder here at Gray, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. And I want to thank you for joining us. We've been working with community colleges for close to a decade, and I feel very remiss that we haven't actually had a webinar that's specifically focused on the kinds of programs and jobs that you all address. So we're going to fix that error today. But before I do, I got to plug my book, Stop, Start, or Grow, which just came out in May. So it's relatively new. It's on Amazon, and would love it if you could read it, buy it, read it, and of course, write a review. The techniques described in here for data-informed approaches to program evaluation are equally applicable to community colleges as they are to four-year colleges. So you'll find yourself represented in the book, and we've done it according to this model effectively with a number of community colleges across the country. So now let's get on with the webinar. I'll keep plugging the book every now and then, but I'll try not to do it too many times. Who is Gray? Some of you may know us, others may not. So by way of introduction, Gray is a software, data, and services firm that focuses on higher education institutions of all kinds. We have put together market and financial data that help you make better program decisions. And increasingly, we're adding to that in a way that helps you make all sorts of other decisions right now on the academic side of the house. So our core product is what we call PES Plus, Program Evaluation Software and Services. We believe we're actually the only provider of a program evaluation system. And I say that because a system is more than labor market data, for example. It encompasses the ability to look at how a program aligns with your mission, how it relates to the academic standards of your institution, how it fits within markets, and what kinds of margins it drives so that the higher margin programs can subsidize lower margin programs in your curriculum. And so that's really our core service. In addition to that, we offer help with pricing and a place, as in where to put your campus or where to geo-target your marketing efforts. Today, we'll touch on Google search volume, and we keep track of search volumes for the 900 most programs with the highest number of completions, which accounts for about 90% of all completions in the US. Then we'll touch on enrollment data that we get from the National Student Clearinghouse. Pretty current there, updated 3 times a year. Employment trends updated as of the end of June. And then we'll look at some non-degree courses and the program of the month. So what's happened with Google search volumes? Very good news here. They're actually up 19% year over year. So we're seeing pretty strong interest in programs that are associated with community colleges and a rebound from last year's low levels. We're still struggling a bit with COVID. In June, the hottest programs were culinary arts, which was up 112%. But let's start with the basics. What's big out there? First of all, you'll see a lot of healthcare throughout this presentation. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with that, but every time I do this, I'm always surprised the extent to which the job market, the larger thing requests in the job market are for healthcare. And here we can see nursing several times on the list, nursing assistant at the top, LPN in the middle. So two touches here. I was looking at a list for four-year colleges, and nursing took 4 of the top 10 slots. So as many of you know, we're running into a real shortage of nurses post-COVID, as many nurses are exhausted and leaving the field. And we still have capped program sizes, so the ability of the education institutions to meet that need is severely constrained by the regulators. Cosmetology was number 2, and a very big program. Good results usually for students, not always easy to document because the results don't show up in W-2s, not all of them anyway, nor on tax returns, since there's a lot of tips involved in that business. But when we looked at it, cosmetology had one of the highest debt repayment rates of all programs. So somehow or other, they're making enough money to pay their bills. Then,
Bob, real quick, we have one question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, is this data available for a specific service area versus the entire US? And I think we can address that.
Yeah, today we won't do it that way, but yes, our system is built so that we can actually go in, look at where your students come from, and then define a market that precisely aligns with the market you serve. Then we pull the data for that market, and when we do that, we pull just unique data for employment, competition, degree fit, and so forth for the market you serve. And we create scorecards from that, and I'll show you one of those later on. In this presentation, we'll stick to national, and the reason for that is that, especially when we're talking with 1L, the system is pretty slow when it's looking at 50 states, and I don't want to put you through that, but trust us, it's in there. And in fact, if we work with you, we typically will create 4 to 6 market definitions, so you can literally click between them and see, for example, what the market looks like is your primary market, what might be true for your region, what's the state look like. And if you're offering national programs, you may even want to look at what online programs, you may want to look at what's going on in the country as a whole. So those can all be there at your fingertips in your system. If you have multiple campuses also, we can have any number of campuses displayed in the system so you can keep track of each one of them and how they're doing. So I was saying commercial truck and bus driver. I don't know how long this is going to continue. We all have seen the pictures of self-guided trucks, but it's with us right now in a big way. We have a national shortage of truck drivers. Also a very attractive program for a school to offer. You'd think it was a lot of capital and you have to buy trucks, but the guys that I know who've operated this can set it up in a few weeks. It really just requires a parking lot, and you actually lease the trucks from one of the truck leasing companies, and primarily the students are going to drive that around the parking lot. So probably not the same parking lot you have your cars parked in. That might not be a good outcome. And so relatively inexpensive to set up. However, the funding is very different if you get into that program. It's really not funded by federal dollars, federal student loans. It's funded by workforce dollars. So you going over to the unemployment office and using money from them to pay for the students that run through your program. Phlebotomy, taking blood is popular. Medical clinical assistant. This has suffered huge damage over the last 8 years since we began to crack down on for-profit operators. This program used to be about 4 times as big as it is today. So I'm glad to see it's still surviving and that there's still interest in it, and still actually a shortage of medical clinical assistants out there, though nowhere near as acute as for nurses. Then we see culinary as one of the larger programs, and do keep in mind that that is not only a large program, but it's actually a very fast growing program as well. Real estate and then construction trades. As rates rise, I don't know if that'll actually affect construction, but it'll probably take a while to work its way through the system since those are big projects and they're already underway in most cases. And then over on fast growth, we have cooking, airframe, a medical clinical assistant, rebounding, cosmetology, surge tech, barbering, fire safety, medical billing and coding, and rad tech, and I should say engineering technology. Notice over here on the fastest growth, 4 out of the top 10 are healthcare. Now let's turn to a different set of data. This comes from the National Student Clearinghouse, and it's enrollment data. We get updates on that 3 times a year. So in many cases, you all are working with data where the primary source of information on what students want is from iPads. That's really a problem. iPad's a great data source, but it's not a good indicator of student trends. Why do I say that? Well, the last data is from 2020. So it's already a couple years old. But the people made their decisions about what programs to take at a community college 2 to 3 years before that. If they, for example, took 150% of time to do that, it'd be 3 years back. So we're looking at data that really is what students wanted in 2017 or 2018, not 2022. So it's almost 5 years out of date. So we went hunting around to find other sources of information that were more current and would be more informative for you. And the Google searches are up to the month. And as I mentioned, this source is updated 3 times a year. And we're looking at fall 2021 data, and we expect to get spring, I hope, soon. LPN led the list. You'll find another bookkeeping program. Nope, not another. I thought I had another nursing program on here, but I don't. Business, number 2. Welding, actually, in number 3, consistent with that building trades we saw on the prior page. Medical clinical assistant. This is really helpful to me because when you look at this, it's really where is the center of mass in terms of students in the community college space. So those 4, actually the 4 largest programs, certificate programs, we're not including in here programs that would be transfer programs. So for example, liberal arts programs are not included in this cut of the data. This is all focused on certificate programs or programs that are more technically focused towards a particular job, if that makes sense. So your transfer programs are not included. We will include those next month, but they're not here this month. So we're looking at 3 or 4 of the biggest programs in the United States at the 2-year level, followed by bookkeeping and accounting, EMT, auto mechanic, very big program there as well, cosmetology, electrician, and HVAC. Now, what's actually growing? Interesting, there's a 12% growth in auto mechanics, one of the biggest programs, 10% growth in cosmetology, also one of the largest, 8% in welding, one of our top 10, HVAC, and EMT paramedic. We saw actually flat year-over-year trend in licensed practical nurses, electrician down 4%, child care provider down 6%. That may reflect some improvement from COVID. And finally, medical clinical assistant declining another 6% off, as I say, what was a few years ago, very high level of engagement. So in fall 2021, in terms of enrollment, business had the highest enrollment of all associates programs. Registered nursing was number 2. I'm going to have to correct myself here. These obviously are the 2-year degree programs. The prior page was certificates. Biology was 3rd. Psych was 4th. Now, many of you are sitting and saying, okay, well, how does psych line up with jobs? And this leads to another one of the big issues with the data that people traditionally use. It's what I call the direct prep fallacy. The National Bureau of Labor Statistics, NCES is the part of it, has a crosswalk. And that crosswalk says, if you have this degree, you're going to go into this job. You're directly prepared for that job. So if I studied nursing, I become a nurse. And as it happens, that's true. 84% of people who study nursing do become nurses. But no one else does what they're told. When we looked at it, we looked at 1,090 programs approximately. For 892 of those programs, less than 20% of the students went into the fields for which they were directly prepared according to NCES. That is, well over 80% of the students did something that they were not directly prepared for. And let's come back to psychology. So you might say, well, how many of these people are actually going to become psychologists or psychiatrists? The answer in psychology is about 4%. So those jobs, that crosswalk for psychology that most people use is actually irrelevant. That's not what psych majors do. So be super careful with labor market data where it's premised on that NCES crosswalk, which by the way is most labor market data. It's just plain wrong. And it's not wrong by a little bit. I always like to pick on history. In history, they say, I'm a history major. You can go to one of 5 fields. when you actually look at the American Community Survey, where they ask, as part of the census, they ask people, what job are you doing, how much money are you making, and what was your undergraduate major? So it's very authoritative data. 2.5 million people participate in the survey. And it turns out history majors don't go into 5 fields. We go into 502 fields. And I look at that and I say, when you have to multiply by 100 to get to the right answer, you didn't miss the target. You didn't miss the broad side of the barn. You missed the farm. And so these are not little errors that are included when you do that. They're enormous errors, particularly for anything associated with the liberal arts. So moving on, and it's true for almost every program except registered nursing actually has the highest percentage that go into direct prep of any program. Computer science is up there, biology, health services, general, bookkeeping, criminal justice, and criminal justice police science. Honestly, those last two always worry me because I don't think there are nearly enough jobs out there for criminal justice graduates. And really the effective programs that I've seen there are focused not on educating college students to become criminologists, but on giving people in the police force the credentials they need to get promoted within the police force. So that one always worries me. Now, over on the right, you can see the fastest growing program is diagnostic medical sonography, or ultrasound tech. And we're actually going to look at that in detail in a few minutes. Number 2 is cybersecurity information assurance. That's probably not a surprise to anybody. That's been a huge trend over the last few years. Welding, fast growing, and rad tech. And then we have a few that are shrinking. Down here in the bottom, clinical, medical lab tech, science technologies, dental hygienist, and vet animal tech. Now, what's going on with jobs? This is a very interesting space as we went into COVID and came back out again. So if you look at it year over year, the job postings in June were down 45%. So let me take a moment and just explain how to read the chart. That green bar is 2022. The light blue bar is 2021, and the black bar is 2020. So what you can see here is that, there's a huge drop here from last year. But when you look at it compared to March 2020, which is the last month coming out of before we went into COVID, we're still up 20%. So there are plenty of jobs out there, and even month over month, we're up 11%. So I'm sorry, we're down 11% month over month, but we're well ahead of last year. So I think we're going to see this trend persist where we're not going to hit last year's numbers in job postings, but we're probably going to stay ahead of that March low the March low coming into 2020, which in many ways is normal in the US. What we've seen for the last 2 years is really abnormal levels of job postings. So what's hot out there in terms of job postings? Well, as you might guess, registered nursing. Then we hit nursing assistants, critical care nurses, clinical nurse specialists, and licensed practical nurses. So in the top 10 jobs, 5 of them are for healthcare. New accounts clerks fits in the top 10. Here's one that surprised me. Executive administrative assistants makes the top 10. I thought that was kind of a job that went away years ago, but evidently I was wrong. Maintenance and repair workers, and then our last 2, bookkeeping and first-line supervisors. We look at change, though, we're getting some impact on the bigger programs, and some of these, I have to caution you, I think are coming off huge highs. So still some growth in nursing assistants, but clinical nurse specialist is down 15%, new accounts down, we see occupational therapy is down, registered nurses down, and critical care nurses. And I'll last come to surge techs. Remember with nursing that this is off record highs. So if I went back and looked again pre-COVID, these would probably all be up. But relative to the spike that we had coming out of COVID, it's starting to subside a little bit. At one point, we had a job posting for 1 in every 5 nurses in the workforce. So hopefully that situation is getting remedied. Now let's take a look at non-degree courses. That is, these are the short courses, largely independent of level that folks are taking out there. The certificates that you hear about, I want to come in, take something for 3 weeks and move on with my life, get a badge. And here we see there's a real this Science of Wellbeing is a top program overall. This is cumulative since the program was launched, a number one on Coursera, but it's also a relatively fast growing program. The Science of Wellbeing is up 492,000 year over year. So it's not only big, it's growing at a pretty good clip. Learning how to learn, actually taking number two. So it's an interesting opportunity, I think, for something like a community college to actually teach people how they can go to school. English for career development. I think this is mostly for non-English speakers. COVID-19 contact tracing, financial markets, successful negotiation. First Step Korean keeps making the list. Not only does it make the list, but if you look over here, it's one of the fastest growing programs on the list. So I found that encouraging. Normally when I look at data for higher ed, the languages are all getting hammered. So there's at least one that people want to take. And I believe if we went a little further down the list, we'd find several others that people are taking, but they're taking them as certificates rather than full academic programs. And then we get technical support, three technical things: technical support, neural networks, and algorithms. I think both of these are really AI kinds of enrollment. Then on terms of growth, data is really the hot concept on the right-hand side. By and large, it's all about data science, and technology, foundations of project management, user experience, learning how to learn, technical support fundamentals. And so it's a very heavy representation here of tech. And then some of the things that we talked about: well-being, English, Korean, and financial markets, and questions to make data-driven decisions, which I suppose we could put back in that data or tech category. Now let's take a look at skills taught in Google's UX certificate on Coursera. So the question we're trying to ask here is, how do the things taught in Coursera line up with what employers want? And the answer is pretty tightly, as you might imagine. So Google offers this UX design certificate, and they teach these 5 things: UX, UX research, wireframe, prototype, and Figma. If anybody out there knows Figma, what Figma is, please put it in the chat. UX design, what do people want? Well, UI, UX, design overall, web capabilities, and web designer. So those top 2 in UI and UX, really the ones that we see both in the Google and in the job posting data. Now, here's just a list of the hot programs on Udemy. First, the largest, and then the fastest growing. I'm going to let you read through the list. I'll pick out a few for you, but what this tells you is where the volume is in terms of short certificate level programs. I would say many of these are actually certificates that might be postgraduate certificates at the bachelor's level, but many are not. So we see Adobe Photoshop, actually top of the list with 509. One of the things I should say, Udemy is really tech focused. When you look at Coursera, it's broader than just tech, but here you're getting a platform that's really tech and business almost exclusively. So you'll see that through here, and that's not just because of interest, it's because this particular site tends to be more focused on tech. And you can see that as you look down a little bit down here: Adobe, C#, SQL Masterclass, Learn C++, Tableau A to Z, and so forth. So it's Adobe Tech, and then the project management training prep seminar. So pretty heavy tech focus here. But the other thing that's interesting is a number that are really focused on things that are about enriching your life. The drawing course, piano for all, maybe After Effects, you could argue with that, character drawing, and Adobe Lightroom Masterclass, probably for both professional and amateur photographers. So it's an interesting mix of things that are either sort of technical or business oriented, and things that are really more about enriching your life. And in terms of fast growth, we see Adobe here, but Agile and Scrum, these are techniques for managing usually software projects, but they're increasingly being used across different kinds of organizations because they turn out to be pretty effective techniques. Power BI, really at this point, that's a system for managing databases and creating visualizations, much like Tableau or Qlik. probability and statistics, startup business models, meditation for beginners, write better emails, marketing analytics. It's really a fascinating agglomeration of things of very different types. So one of the things I think is helpful is actually be able to have some data on what people want, because it's very difficult to predict what particular certificates people are going to be interested in enrolling in. But of course, if you got the data, it becomes a little bit easier. Now let's take a look at one specific program. Now I mentioned that we offer a program evaluation system, and we do. And part of that system is the ability to profile a program along 4 dimensions that really address the external market. Do students want the program? Are employers hiring graduates in the program? What's the competition look like? And does this program fit with the kinds of degrees that my school chooses to offer? So for a community college, you're probably not going to teach neurosurgery. And if I'm a tier 1 research institution, I'm probably not going to want to teach house painting. That's what that last block is for. Now, the other thing I'm going to, and I probably have the converted here, I apologize, but if that's the case, but I believe community colleges in particular have actually been overemphasizing employment data in their program decisions. Why do I say overemphasizing? Because given the enrollment issues at community colleges, you got to fill the seats. And generally speaking, employers don't fill seats, students do. And so when you're making program decisions, it's vitally important that you understand not just what employers want, but what students want. And that way, I think we can begin to move the needle back to the positive off these 9% year over year enrollment declines in the community college sector. Now, let me balance that. It's not that employment isn't important. It is. But it needs to be probably equal weighted with student demand on average, so that you not only get people jobs and address the needs of your local employers, but you're also certain to have the students coming in the front door that you need in order to keep the lights on at the community college. And also, if you don't have students, you can't train people for whatever job there may be. So it's really important that you have both of those in your analysis. So let's have a look at how things rank. Now, in our system, we keep about 50 variables, and we keep them for about 1,400 academic programs. And the nice part about that is it means we can actually compare any given program to 1,400 others. And if we were working together, we'd have flagged up the programs that you offer based on the zip codes that they're classified in. And we can see how your existing programs compare to any new program you may be considering. And here we have them ranked by a total percentile of their score. We score each of the 50 variables, and that can be customized if you like. And diagnostic medical sonography comes out in the top of the list, 98th percentile. Now, an important point here, if you are doing a single program in a program profile to decide whether to offer it, medical sonography will probably come out pretty high. But you do have to remember when you do that, you are implicitly ignoring the programs that may actually be better. That's not a problem when you're going after a good program, but very often we end up looking at something that's really, say, the 90th percentile, and you're missing programs that are much, much better in terms of student demand and employment, simply because you're not researching them. So I think having something where you can look at all your options in one place, so you can put the individual program in the appropriate context, I think is really important. Now you can see here, as this thing got to the top of the list, because it has very strong student demand, not a good score on competitive intensity, very good score on employment. So it's really these two ends that are driving the score. Now you'll see degree fit percentiles 100. That's because we've only picked programs that are a good fit for the associate's level. So everything in here is going to get a score of 100 as a fit for an associate's degree. So in effect, that particular scoring item doesn't matter for this purpose. But if we were working together, you'd want to filter out all the programs that were inappropriate. Or for a community college, we often look at it 2 ways. We'll take all the trades programs and really things that are going to be done in 2 years or less, and have a scoring system and look at those in one group. And then we'll have a different scoring system and ranking for programs that are part of your transfer work. So you have to really, at a community college, you're looking at 2 different ways. And today we're going to go take a deep dive on diagnostic medical sonography. You'll notice all our stuff is color coded, Pretty simple. Green is good, red is not good. And the darkest green means the program's at the 98th percentile. That medium green is the 95th percentile. And one thing to remember when you're doing program analysis is your standard should be very, very high, especially for new programs. You have a choice of 1,400 programs to offer. You couldn't probably, if you really were pushing it, you can launch maybe 5 programs in 2 years. I know people have done better than that, but that's a pretty aggressive goal. Well, that means out of that 1,400 programs, you can only accept, if you will, 5 candidates. That's a tougher screen than Harvard. So when you're looking for programs, you really want to look at that 98th percentile to try and find the really top programs that you can add to your portfolio. In this case, ultrasound comes pretty close. You can see overall, it was at the 98th percentile. When we look at the specifics, now we're looking at student demand metrics here. We've got Google search volume, trailing 3 months, 93rd percentile. International page views, we're not going to see a lot in the 2-year and associate sector for international. So this pulls a 0 there, but that's not uncommon. New student enrollment volume, 95th percentile. So very good number there. On-ground completions, 96th percentile. Somehow or other, somebody's taken this program online, but I'd always wonder how exactly you do that. Maybe they're putting the equipment on their own belly or something. But I find that a little bit hard. But some at least think they're doing that. And then we can have a sum of on-ground and online completions at 4402, again, 95th percentile. So what these 95s and so forth up here and indicators of program size tell us is this is a whale of a big program. It's one of the bigger programs that are offered at the 2-year and below level. Then the question is, okay, but is it growing or shrinking? And the Google search volumes are actually up quite a bit, a 97th percentile increase. And that's a 44% growth year over year. New student enrollment is up, which is very encouraging. Completion volume is down. That's, when you get this kind of inversion between 2 similar metrics, Google search is, student enrollment's up, but completions are down. You have to sort of step back and say, okay, how do I evaluate those 2 numbers? How do I interpret them? And my advice would be if you're looking for kind of very long-term trends, completion volume may be relevant. But if you want to understand what students want right now, you need either Google search or enrollment data. Why? Because as I mentioned, the IPEDS data is telling you what students wanted 5 years ago. And also maybe telling you how many students dropped out of school during COVID, so they're not there to complete. So in this case, I wouldn't overlook that. I'd be thinking about it kind of back of my mind, making sure I don't see other indicators that are consistent with a decline. But I would say the current data is more relevant and very, very positive for this program. Now, of course, you want to look at employment. For all my issues with overemphasizing employment, don't underemphasize it either. Job postings for the last 12 months, pretty healthy here, 88th percentile. Not fabulous, right? We're not at the 98th percentile anymore, but still good. Now, we look at the ACS bachelor's outcomes. I'm going to skip that for right now because the American Community Survey doesn't ask people in associate's degree what they majored in. So it's not really relevant for you all. And then I look at the BLS 1-year and 3-year growth rates. Both of those are okay, 75th and 81st percentile. Job postings per graduate, very healthy, 5.5 job postings per graduate. So it's very encouraging. And then last, wages here range from about 50,000 to 75 or 80,000. So for a 2-year program, that's generally pretty good. Not fabulous. There are things that do earn more, but that's pretty good. Again, feel free to chime in with any questions you have. U.S. job postings for ultrasound techs, however, did drop 9% year over year. But like the earlier data, they're still 118% higher than they were in March 2020. So it's an extraordinary level of demand for ultrasound techs compared to what we were used to pre-COVID, albeit, it's coming down a little bit, but these are still very, very high numbers. In June, let's break down, so we're going to break down sonography now and look at which kinds of sonographers were most in demand. Ultrasound tech, then cardiac sonographers. Generalists, I think sonographer is going to be a generalist as well. Diagnostic sonographer specifically, ultrasound tech, and then vascular sonographer makes the list. And cardiovascular sonographer, probably, again, similar jobs there. Now, in terms of skills that people are looking for rather than job postings, these are the skills within those job postings. Obviously, you can see ultrasound at the top. Patient care is number 2. Vascular, consistent with the cardiovascular sonography over here. Radiology, diagnostic ultrasound, OBGYN, the only time I've seen this used. So very important there. Invasive sonography, general, and echocardiography. So as I look at this, I'm not quite sure what PACS is. When I look at this, there's clearly something that says heart specialization within this or experience could be very advantageous. So why do we look at skills? You guys are probably way ahead of me on this, because you want to check your program and make sure that the skills you're teaching in your program are consistent with the skills that people want now. So as I look at this, I see a trend here, not a trend, but a real need for diagnostic medical sonographers who understand how to do vascular and cardiac analyses. So what's happening with competition? This is the drawback for this program. You can see it gets a score of -9. It's in the 2nd percentile. In this case, being number 1 is not good. That's one of the 2 worst percentiles. So it's very relatively crowded field. 246 campuses with graduates, 8 new schools added during this time period, and 7 were in the particular market. In this case, it's national, so it's almost all the same. Average program completions is decent, 18. Median is 12. So I tend to prefer the median as a number because the average tends to be skewed by some very large programs. So the medians can be more representative of the typical program. Now, the other thing we see here is it's down 1. Year-over-year median program completions drop by 1. That worries me. When I start to see the median size of a program decline, that means that people are in the market or having trouble filling their seats. Again, a worry. This could be an outcome of COVID in the sense that people dropped out of the program during that period, so their completion rates were not as high. But I don't know that to be true, but it's possible. And that's a decrease of 8%. Now we look at another set of competitive indices here. Google search cost per click and competitive index, I find pretty interesting. The cost per click is only $8. That puts it to 71st percentile. So again, high-ish, but certainly not toxic if you were trying to attract students. And interestingly, the competition index is only 0.39. That goes on a scale from 0 to 1, with 1 being most competitive. So 0.39 actually makes it below average. And that would indicate you could still probably attract students into this program if you chose to. Now, is it an associate's program is another important question. I think many of you already know the answer to that. It is. And you can see that national completions, 60% approximately are at the associate's level. It's actually 78% of enrollment in this particular program. And then you look at what degree people have in the workforce, and you can see it's 36% associates, a few here at other degree levels. I was surprised to see a pretty heavy dose of people at higher level degrees, 36% for bachelor's and 7% for master's. And then what we do is we put that all together on one page. And I'm not going to try and walk you through the whole page. We've actually been through student demand, employment, and competitive intensity. And you might ask yourself, well, why is this, on one page? It looks awfully busy and it's hard to read. In our systems, it's actually much easier to read because it's not constrained by all the stuff in PowerPoint. But we do that because decision makers don't really want to hunt around through different systems or sheet reports and so forth to pull the data together when they're being asked to check on the health of a program or to evaluate it and make a decision about a program. So we deliberately strain the eyes in order to make it easier for people to look at a complete set of data about the market attractiveness for an individual program. That's also why we use the color coding. You can at a glance see where the strengths and weaknesses of this program are. Student demand's dark green, employment's pretty good in the light green, competition's not so great in pink. And then you can start to say, I want to look at the pinks and make sure that I know what these weaknesses are. And I'm comfortable that given those weaknesses, this is still a viable program. And at most schools it is that have it already. So that's how we do the scoring for an individual program. This happens to be ultrasound tech, but the same concepts apply to really any program. And we can pull the same data for you. As someone asked at the beginning, that data will be for the particular market or markets you serve. So it's very customized and has this sort of robust four-dimensional view to it. So let's see what we found out.
We have a real quick question from, have you ever thought about adding more years, let's say 2018 through 2022, so the trends can be seen through a pre-pandemic lens and to help us look what was and now?
Yeah, well, some of the data sets we can do that, some we can't. And more often than not, we can't because we've changed data suppliers and so forth. So we could do that for employment. We have that time series going back, but we've only got a couple years of the enrollment data. And Google search, we've been doing it for a few years, but not for all programs. So we would have trouble going back much more than 2 or 3 years. So that's why the way we're working around that is looking at that, last quarter, first quarter of 2020, before COVID really hit, and comparing to that as a baseline. There's a question here on bachelor's at 36%. Great question. It could be a couple of different things. One is you mentioned that people get out with a bachelor's and they say, oops, I want to get a different degree. So they go and get an AAS in ultrasound. Then there's a second possibility, which is they get their degree in ultrasound and want to go back and finish a 4-year degree. So either of those could lead to people with a 4-year education in a program that's generally a 2-year program. But I think there are folks out there running this as a 4-year too. It's actually a very challenging program and requires a fair amount of training, both kind of traditional academic as well as on the equipment itself. So I bet there are people out there running this as a 4-year program, but I honestly don't know for sure. I see a word of caution. It's ultrasound, very expensive program to start and run. I believe that's probably true. And frankly, it's true for many medical programs where you might have to, for example, buy mannequins and they go for $100,000 a piece. So you can simulate various things in your classrooms. Nursing, as you know, has that component. Dental assistant has that component because you have to have, a full dental chair and so forth for people to work with. So it's not uncommon, when you're working in the healthcare fields to have pretty high startup costs. The other thing that's true here is they're typically heavily regulated, and the regulation just has stacks and stacks of layers. The feds regulate it by the Department of Education. Then you'll have the state regulated. Then you'll have your institutional accreditor who wants to have a say. And finally, you'll have a programmatic accreditor for many healthcare programs that'll govern that particular area. So it can be quite a lengthy process to get a program up and running. And the capital costs can be a lot.
I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but a lot of times when we look at these really expensive programs, they also tend to generate a lot of revenue, which is the other thing we always stress about when we're talking about programs, is you have to not just look at how expensive they are, but how much revenue will you generate as well. So that's something to consider when talking about launching this program. We do have another software that's part of our PES Plus system that looks at economics.
Yeah, and when we look at margins, that's direct instruction, the revenue that students bring in by student, net of their scholarships, and we subtract out what we call direct instructional cost. So that doesn't include overhead. And we looked at the margin generated by that program. Nursing actually does much better than average. I think it was 40% above the average in the particular cut we happened to do once. Now, there's some overhead they got to cover, and that overhead tends to be a little higher in nursing than other areas where, for example, by rule, you have to have a doctorally educated director of your nursing program. So that's going to set you back $150,000 or more. And we mentioned the facilities. So yes, there's some pretty high fixed costs, but nursing, surprisingly enough, can be a very high margin program. All right, now I'm going to stop. I'll just run through quickly what we learned, and then I'll stop and we'll turn it over to Wanel, and you can tell us what programs you want us to look at, and we'll take 15 minutes and look at the ones that are of interest to you. So Google searches were up 19% year over year for community colleges. Thank God. I think the slump may be coming to an end. I hope you're starting to feel that in your enrollment. Fall 2021 certificate in auto mechanics actually grew the fastest year over year. And at the associate level, ultrasound tech grew the fastest. Registered nursing and nursing assistants had the highest volume of job postings, even though it was coming down a little bit for nursing assistants. And demand for ultrasound tech programs at the associate level is high. Student demand is high. The employment market is doing pretty well. There is a risk here, that it is saturated. There are a lot of competitors out there. I wouldn't assume that it is yet, and it may vary in your local market, but there's certainly indicators that it's reaching capacity. And if your students major in this, they can come out and earn a decent living afterwards. And I wouldn't be surprised with all the stuff that's been going on if these numbers have actually gone up recently in terms of pay. So let me stop there. And I see a request for diesel tech. I believe that's a separate program, Wanel. So we'll have a look at that.
Yeah, but it looks like 470605.
Yep.
And feel free to just drop any other programs in the chat. 47.
I guess I have to stop sharing my screen. There we go.
470605. See what we have here. I'll start sharing my screen. All right, so I quickly was able to just search for the zip code. I'm going to go ahead and select this program now. Before I even open up the details, what we can expect to see, which is one of the beauties of the system, is we know that the student demand comparative to all other programs is going to be strong. Same with the employment. Any questions that we might have are probably going to lie within the competitive intensity at the national level here. So I'm going to go ahead and select the program and then populate the scorecard here. Let me check the chat out really quickly. And if possible, if we know the zip code of the program, it would be helpful to see. If not, I can quickly use the power of Google, of course, and figure it out. Automated industrial technology.
I think there was somebody did post the zip code for this. So let's keep going with diesel.
Oh, it was me. I'm somebody.
Okay, so this is diesel. Looks good.
Here we go. Yep, looking at diesel again, right? What we expected to see from the program rank was some strong student demand metrics. Now we can zoom in on what those are. In specific, we can see that the Google search volume comparative to all their programs here are at the 80th percentile with 60,000 Google search volumes. Of course, we could dive into those 60,000 and see, what are the search volumes that are being searched for. It's the power of the system here. We also have student enrollment is strong. So new student enrollment in the past 12 months at just under 3,500. That's going to be a 98th percentile value. On-ground completions are strong, and it seems like the online completions don't really exist.
And surprising. Hard to be a diesel tech, I think people, though, it's funny, there is a school that does offer auto tech virtual. And it's actually used by one of the big employers to train some of their folks. So it's not impossible to do these things virtual these days, especially if you can get a VR headset out there.
Mm-hmm. And then to jump from the student demand, where it looks like it's strong in terms of size, the only metric that seems, actually all of these metrics seem to be also growing. The only one that's dropping is going to be completion volume year over year. It looks like it's down almost 900 units in terms of completion volumes. But despite that, we're seeing an increase in enrollment, an increase in Google search volumes, both in units and percentage growth. Then when we look at the employment data, it looks like the job posting totals are relatively strong here nationally. Just under 27,000 job postings, bringing this into an 87th percentile position. So, strong student interest, it seems. There's also strong employment opportunities nationally. The flags might exist here just in the wage category, depending on how you interpret the wages. Something like a 10th percentile wage at 33,000 is bringing this down to the 29th percentile comparative to other programs.
Yeah, it's interesting that, well, yeah, the ACS would bring it up again. But in this case, I think BLS is probably more accurate. And then the one other number I like to look at, Winnell, is job postings per grad. And here you
Yep.
can see there are 3.1 job postings for every graduate from a diesel program. So that's actually pretty encouraging. That wouldn't be a shortage. You can see it's only at the 66th percentile, but nonetheless, it's well above average. The nice thing about Diesel Tech 2 is a program I've actually worked around a couple of times. You can do this job anywhere in the world. I heard there are a few job openings in Ukraine for people who can fix a diesel engine. But you know, a diesel is a diesel, and so there's a lot of flexibility in terms of where you work.
You can see 72% of the completions here are going to be certificate level. We can see this here in the national completions by level. And then quickly just want to highlight the competition. It looks like it's a 97th percentile program in the sense of how many other campuses offer this program, for a total of 287. And this has increased by 6 campuses year over year. So 6 new campuses have entered this market. Average program completion is 30 and the median is 10. And we can also see some Google search cost per clicks here at $23 per click for the Google search volume, with a competition index of 0.42. Anything else here to?
Well, you know, I look at this, and I think all of us are concerned with social mobility and diversity and equity. This is a program that someone can take with relatively little academic preparation. There's some tough parts of this, but they can come in as long as they're willing to work hard and walk out with a degree that puts them into the middle class. That's pretty attractive. It's also especially attractive for men. And as I think many of you are aware, at this point, we're 60-40 female to men on campus. And then the men drop out faster. So finding a program where guys can come in and be successful, I think is actually disproportionately important right now. That's not to say we shouldn't keep graduating women, we should, but most campuses have plenty of space for both. And this is one program where, you know, you can begin to bring guys back into the fold. And you know, my experience with it is it's actually a pretty attractive program. The problem here is you got all kinds of facilities issues. So typically you're going to need high bays that can fit a tractor trailer in them. So you need 18-20-foot ceilings to run the program. You got to have a tractor trailer unit, which is not cheap, or 2. And the tools themselves are very expensive. You're talking about wrenches that are as long as your arm and weigh 10 pounds. So the setting this up is also expensive, and that's generally going to be true for your tech programs.
Cool. And then I see the automated industrial technology. I do see the zip code. Just quickly, just want to take a step back just in case there's other ones. I'm going to look at just the 4-digit of the 4703s, just in case, because sometimes the program name doesn't always directly match the zip code. So let's just look at the family, 4703. And let's see what these programs look like from a macro perspective.
Now, what is 4703, Winnell?
It is industrial. Well, the family is called heavy industrial equipment, and the program of focus is going to be industrial mechanics, maintenance tech. But I know that the request was for automated industrial technology, which I don't think is a direct zip code, but might be here.
You did supply one, so.
Yep, 470303, opening up the scorecard now. So for this zip code, we see a lot of strength in the student demand section. So I'm going to look to see why that is the case here in the data, as well as the employment, right? Immediately we see the dark greens. And for the student demand, it looks like the size metrics are all strong here. We're seeing some strength in Google search volumes, new student enrollment, on-ground completions. We do see a presence of online completions as well. And also the growth metrics are all growing as well. So strong student interest, both in size and growth. And
we look at the dark green there, everybody, for job postings. Yep. It's a very attractive program in terms of employment. What is that, 100,000 job openings right now? Yep,
104,000, putting it at the 95th percentile here.
Yeah, and then I look at job postings per graduate, 13.3. That's quite a number. So I don't think people coming out of this program are going to have any trouble finding a job.
Yep.
And good wages, a little bit lower than the ones we saw before, actually. That's interesting.
50.0602. Just for the sake of time, I'm actually going to go ahead and just jump right into that other one. 50.0602. Cinematography and film production here. Ooh. For those of you who asked about specific geographies, right? This dropped down on the markets, which we're not going to dive into right now. This would be an example of how the markets would look in the system here, right? We can load in any kind of custom market. Here we have some MSAs across the US preloaded in here, but we can really customize and dive into specific markets as well. So when I'm looking at cinematography and film video production, again, student demand, the quadrant as a whole is performing in that dark green. This is where we're going to get that macro perspective. Yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
Not quite as consistently dark green for the individual metrics as we were seeing, but still very good.
Yep. And of course, the light blue might not look as strong as the dark green, but it still is strong, right? We're seeing a 75th percentile quadrant. And it's coming from the size of the job posting, still relatively strong here with 89th percentile at 36,000 jobs. It looks like, although
job
this
is for grad is another really nice number, 4.2, 7, a little bit further down.
Yep.
Big decline last year though. 11%. I suppose we're probably looking at COVID in that number. And wages are kind of meh, 30,000 to 55,000, 56,000.
I think it's interesting to see that there's also master's level programs here at 11%.
A lot of bachelors too.
What else do we see here?
How's the competition?
Looks like 4 campuses left this market. And this is actually being scored. This would be an example of how the scoring rubrics and the priorities work, right? In this case, the scoring rubric is being set where if we identify an area where campuses left the market, we're going to actually award this some points, and we're going to interpret this as maybe a potential opportunity through this focus. So this is getting 2 points because 4 campuses left. That's kind of how this reads here. But still 108 total campuses for a 91st percentile competition. So a lot of people, a lot of institutions in this market.
Kind of small too, 8 completions per year. So, you know, in a community college, you probably, if you want to think about students, let's say we've got 3 years on average for a person to get through, plus let's say 50% attrition. So you're going to multiply that number by 5 or 6 to kind of roughly estimate how many students might be in the program. So let's use 5 because I can do it in my head. That's going to be 40 students across the 2 years. So it's not super small, but it's not as large as some of the things we're just looking at. And competitively, it's actually pretty competitive.
And
I was looking at Google search and stuff.
I would just say, you know, we are looking at a very specific zip code as well. I feel like for something like cinematography or this family of programs, you know, it could always be helpful to just take a step back and just look at the whole family. Because when we're looking at just one specific zip code, we're kind of putting a lot of trust in that every institution is, you know, reporting this program directly to the zip code when there could be overlap in the O1s, the O2s, the O5s. So when we're looking at the competition, we might want to look at it at a 4-digit level, which is possible in the competitors tab. Again, we're only looking at a scorecard today, but there's a lot more ways that we dive into the data here. Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
I was just looking at the cinematography and film. So obviously pretty attractive. All right.
Stop sharing my screen here.
Now I think we're out of time. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. And please join us again next month. We'll bring you both an updated data on the whole market and a new program of the month.
And really quickly, just for everybody here, we are starting a community college bootcamp, which you all have emails for. It's basically a look at how to evaluate your academic programs. You'll be receiving emails probably in the next couple of weeks. So be on the lookout for them, and we hope you enjoy join us for those as well.
And I almost forgot, and don't forget, if you want to learn how to do this, the book is on Amazon, Start, Stop, or Grow. And it's by me, Robert Gray Atkins, in that case, so that I didn't get confused with a diet doctor. Thanks
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.